What I'm curious, like if you're thinking like day one of the invasion to this maybe like the 6 month mark, if you were talking on the street to like your average Ukrainian, how have their attitudes changed?
Early on, there was a lot of uncertainty. There was a lot of fear. They didn't know if the capital would stand, if their country would be around. After a few weeks, when we saw that the Russians had failed in taking the capital, and not only that, but they had been pushed out and were forced to retreat back to Russia. There was great pride here, and morale was very high. And the Ukrainians believed then that they were capable of winning this war. And I think that carried into summer when they managed to, with great difficulty and significant loss of life, stop Russia from continuing its offensive action in eastern Ukraine, although we did see the loss of cities like Lysychansk and Severodonetsk in the east there. But the Russian offensive really stopped that summer. They weren't able to do much more, and so morale remained really high. It was so through autumn, especially during this blitz on Kharkiv region, where we saw the Ukrainians in their first counteroffensive take back a significant amount of territory in dramatic, surprising fashion. And then also the city of Kherson in the south. Morale waned some in the winter. I mean, winter is a really difficult period of time here. It's cold, it's dry, your skin cracks. It hurts to go outside. And neither army made a lot of progress on the battlefield. And that's really when the Battle of Bakhmut became this just grueling war of attrition that was, seeing thousands of casualties, a week even. And then I think, Russia trying its hand at another counteroffensive and failing in January and February, again gave the Ukrainians a little bit of a boost. And that's when Kiev and also Western allies, including the United States, began talking about sending a significant amount of more weaponry and ammunition to Ukraine. And we first started hearing about the potential delivery of tanks and other various weapon systems for Ukraine's upcoming spring counteroffensive. And so Ukrainians really were, pumped up and excited about spring. But that kind of dragged out for not weeks, but for months. And in that time, the Russians were able to dig in to the territories that they occupied in the south and the east and build these extremely complex and dense networks of fortifications that have anti-tank ditches and trenches and miles deep minefields. And we're seeing now
Miles deep.
miles deep, 3 to 10 miles of scattered mines, trenches, barbed wire. It's awful stuff. And and you know, without knowing exactly how much of a challenge those would pose, people here were pretty pumped about the counteroffensive because expectations for it were very high. So we're at this moment now where the counteroffensive is not going according to plan. The Ukrainians have really struggled. They've not been able to break through these, you know, heavily defended, dense defenses that Russia has had a lot of time to build. And people are tired. There's a real feeling of exhaustion. This has been going on for a year and a half at this scale, and for more than 9 years now in the southeast, and people are exhausted, and they're worried that the rest of the world is going to also get tired and become less interested in helping, and that there will be a big election in the United States that could mean, or well, could impact Western support for Ukraine. And so, there's great concern that without significant success on the battlefield in the next weeks or months, that people will see Ukraine's fight as essentially, culminating, like that it's they've done all they can. Now it's time to sit down and negotiate. And nobody here wants to negotiate when they've lost their homes, entire cities, towns, when they've lost loved ones. I think a recent poll said there were 78% of Ukrainians knew someone close to them who had been killed or wounded, had essentially been a casualty in this war. And that's an extraordinary amount of people when you have a country of 40 million people.